Welcome aboard Facebook and YouTube. This is Jim Blythe. Joining me today, Mark Liebman, author, amazing friend, SAR rescue pilot, you name it, from Vietnam. Hey, we got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about current events and how they relate to you. So this is Jim Blythe, and we'll be right on the air right now. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Hey, what a great day, and it's the start of February. It's the start of the love month. Well, okay. So later in the month, we're going to have Cedric White, his beautiful wife, Michelle, talking about marriage counseling and talking about getting married. So if you're interested in getting married, listen in next week because we're going to start that. But this week, Mark Liebman is my host, co-host, is my friend, and I got to tell you, you have the most distinguished career. U.S. Navy captain, SAR rescue pilot, author, amazing best-selling author. Your Age of Sail books are incredible. Your books about Vietnam, and I don't know how many times you've been on, and I've always said, when I read the first one, I go, Mark, this isn't fiction.
Yes, it is.
I was there. And we were on board the same carrier, the Oriskany, about the same time in my last cruise. So Mark is a brilliant guy. He is also one of the people involved in the National Defense Series briefing that we participate in. So, Mark, I think it's appropriate right now as we're into the second month of this year. Let's talk about current events and let's talk about what's going on in the Middle East. And you and I were talking about the attacks in the Middle East right now towards us.
First thing I want to let the listeners know is that one of these days I'll grow up and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. But anyway.
I think it's being an important veteran. You could
anyway, I say that facetiously. But so we want to talk about what's going on in the Gulf of Aden and the Houthis. The United States finally has started launching strikes against them. We have several allies who are participating, but they are finding out that their abilities to carry out, I'll use the word offensive operations against a shore-based enemy are limited. And it's causing a fair amount of angst in Whitehall right now, which is in England, and in the offices of the First Lord of the Admiralty, because the British ships that were deployed to the Arabian Gulf, or not Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, did not have any land attack capability. And there's questions being asked is, well, why didn't we have this? Well, I hate to say this, it's the result of decades of budget cuts to the Royal Navy, and a lot of its capabilities have atrophied or gone away in many cases. Now, to their credit, the Brits have started rebuilding the Royal Navy into the force it should have been 5 or 10 years ago. But anyway, so what's happening? The Houthis are launching 3 kinds of missiles at ships in the Gulf of Aden. I'm going to use missiles, one of which are these Shahed drones, or we'll just call them drones. There's probably more than one type. The second thing is they're launching ballistic missiles, which go follow an arc that go into the stratosphere and then comes screaming down. And then there are cruise missiles. The problem the U.S. is facing is not detecting them and not destroying them. It's the cost of the weapons that he used to do this. So think about this for a second. I don't remember exactly what it costs per flight hour of an F-18E or F is, but to hunt down a bunch of drone cruise missiles with an F-18 with got 1 or 2 guys in it and shoot it down with a Sidewinder, which costs $500,000, is an expensive way to conduct business. Or to launch a $2 million SM-6 or SM-3 at a cruise missile or a ballistic missile. So is again an expensive way of doing business because the economics are against you. The drone costs, these Shahed drones cost $20,000. Lord knows what the cruise missiles cost, and the ballistic missiles are a little bit more, but they're far less. expensive as what we're using to bag them. So the subject has come up with about what they call directed energy weapons, which are microwave or laser. And the problem is in the Pentagon, there's no champion of these kinds of weapons because there's no, quote, operational requirement. Now, if I was a chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, if you're listening, I would be pounding on the desk of the Secretary of Defense. Oh, wait a second. He is back from the hospital. And saying, we need to do this. We have the weapons. There is actually a functioning laser at Dahlgren, which is a naval test facility in Virginia. And we can build these things and we can put them on ships. And also the Army has one that they've been playing around with. So let's go play with it and go figure it out. And we'll worry about the paperwork later. Because last time I checked, when you're being shot at, that is an operational requirement to defend ourselves. That's part of our rules of engagement.
Yes.
So what I think is going to happen, hopefully, is, and there's been several pundits who are talking about this, is it may spur directed energy weapon development and deployment aboard ships. Now, there are programs out there, but they're a ways away. So what are we doing? Well, number one, we've started to launch cruise missiles and with airstrikes against the Houthis. The problem is, and I'll get to what's going on in Syria and Jordan in a second. So the problem is that we've waited a while, and we're, quote, doing proportional response. Well, the last time I checked, proportional response has not actually worked, because what happens is you hit the bully, he walks back and then comes back again, and you don't take care of the bully. And the real problem is the guys in Tehran. And until they feel pain, this is not going to stop. So again, they're using airstrikes in Yemen. They're using airstrikes in Syria. As it is made the news, 3 Americans were killed and 34 were wounded in a strike in a U.S. base in Jordan, which means they violated Jordanian sovereignty. And so this is a much bigger issue, and yet the U.S. is bearing the burden. Now, are other nations involved? Yes. Problem for nations like Jordan and Egypt is that they have large Muslim populations who are opposed to or in favor of whatever these rebels are doing. So they have to be very, what's the right word, discreet about what they admit to publicly. So, for example, does Egypt want to close the tunnels that go in from Gaza into Egyptian territory? Absolutely. Can they publicly state that? No. Because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is where all these terrorist organizations, if you look at their family tree, go back to, will raise hell inside Egypt. So again, Jordan the same way. We've had a presence in Jordan for, well, at least since before the Gulf War. Gulf War I, that's 1991. And so we're using those bases. But the question is airstrikes alone, with all due respect to the United States Air Force, doesn't always carry the day. And so we have to get much more aggressive. So what can we do? There's a lot of things. But again, you have to cause pain in Tehran.
Let me ask you a question. Because, man, this is coming back to me like the air war in North Vietnam that you and I both were involved in and there. They didn't fight to win. They just slapped them on the hand, and we ended up with one hell of a mess that hurt a whole lot of people. So either you're there and you stand up and, as you said, kick the bully. Well, it's a matter of you've got to take away their ability to commit war, their ability. And that was the whole thing behind Truman's using the nuclear weapon. He's been criticized so much, but he said you have to take away that undeniably. And the same thing with Germany, with Japan, and in the past. If we don't take away their lethality, we don't take away their ability to do war, they're just going to keep doing it.
Yes. So proportional response, I can give you examples down through the ages. You brought up Vietnam. I was going to use Korea. I was going to use a couple others. But the fact of the matter is it doesn't run. So the question is, what can you do to Iran to cause pain? Well, number one, you need to stop the flow of weapons coming into Yemen and across Iraq and into Syria. That's going to be hard. Excuse me. That's going to be harder, easier said than done. Yemen is a little easier because it has to come by water. The U.S. Navy can interdict it, and the simple way to do it is just blockade the Arabian Gulf and inspect every ship that comes out. And the Navy does it all the time. We do it in international waters. We do it through a legal process that's been vetted over the years. It's called vessel board search and seizure. You do it with a law enforcement officer in the command center. You board the ship, you search it. If it's got contraband, you seize it. If it's not, you send it on its merry way and say, "Have a good day." And that's what happened. Two SEALs, by the way, just died in a VBSS operation, in which we found all kinds of stuff. What they showed in the pictures was just, I have to believe, a small portion of what was on the vessel. And it's relatively easy to do. Is it an act of war? Yes, technically. By the laws of war, blockade is an act of war. However, shooting at somebody else is also an act of war. Violating somebody's sovereign territory and shooting at them or shooting missiles at them is an act of war. So we got to get past this, this is going to escalate. No, it's not going to escalate, because when the bully is kicked in the groin and he's bent over double because he's in incredible pain, he's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And the last time we kicked Iran in the nose or punched around in the nose is when we killed Soleimani, and that was done under the Trump administration. If you go back, and again, this is another part of this thing, we've been at war with Iran since 1980. It's 4 decades. We've had 5 presidents in those decades. Okay, we've had Reagan, we've had both Bushes, we've had Clinton, we've had Obama, and Trump, and now Biden. And the policy has gone back and forth. Okay, when we had a strong set of sanctions in place, and the Iranians were afraid that we would impose more or do something really ugly, like what happened during Praying Mantis when we sank 2 of their corvettes, took down a bunch of oil rigs. They stopped, okay, for a while. Then another president comes in and says, "Oh, I want to negotiate a nuclear arms deal," and they started again.
And then, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, we opened up the bank accounts that they got some ungodly amount of money.
Yep.
And that money is, we think, being used against us.
Yeah, so the current administration claims that, oh, yeah, we gave them the money, but we control where it goes. Really?
How can you do that?
Thank you. When you do an electronic funds transfer, once you push send, the money's gone.
Yeah.
So anyway, again, there are lots of things we can do to Iran. Like I said, blockade the Arabian Gulf is one, to prevent the arms coming into Yemen. Continue the airstrikes, get more and more of them, and destroy more and more stuff, so that it becomes more and more difficult for them to resupply and also reconstitute. And then sanctions need to go back in place. The Iranians literally need to be cut off from the world. They currently, under the Biden administration, are allowed to sell 5 million barrels, I think is what the number is, a large number of barrels of oil a day, which, guess what, is money. Do you think the money is going into the Iranian economy? Au contraire, it's going into the IRGC.
Yeah, and this is a frightening situation. We're getting political, but it's really a political boondoggle. And if you go back in history, take a look. If the name Neville Chamberlain doesn't mean anything to you, then go look it up, because he was the Prime Minister of England that enabled Adolf Hitler to go into Czechoslovakia and Poland and start World War II. And had he been stood up to, that wouldn't have happened, or maybe wouldn't have happened. Let me ask you, though, we're talking about in the Gulf of Aden and the Houthis and Iran. How is this relevant or playing out with what's going on with Hamas and the Israelis?
Okay, so there are 3 locuses here, and I'll bring up, one's Tehran and the things that they're doing. They fund Hamas and Hezbollah to the tune of about 90-some%, depending on who you talk to. Some say it's 97, some say it's 93, but once you get above 90, it's pretty much all of it. They provide both Hezbollah and Hamas with logistics support. That means safe houses, documents, food, stuff like that. They provide them with weapons and ammunition. They provide training, and they've been doing it. They've been doing it with Hezbollah for at least 15, 20 years, and they've been doing it with Hamas for the same amount of time, and they've been doing it with other organizations around the world. Right now, there are, I think, if the last count I had, over 30 terrorist organizations supported by Iran in just the Middle East. And I've got a list of them. If your listeners want to, I can give it to Nathan, and we can pop it up you can pop it up on the screen at some other point. But the fact of the matter is, there's tons of them, and some you'd recognize, some you don't. Some are, I use the word fake or fictitious, because they conduct an attack and they decide to name it under some new terrorist organization just to confuse Western intelligence. So Iran is funding all this activity, and therefore nothing happens without their blessing or their encouragement. Because if you do something they don't want, they're going to cut off the money, they're going to cut off the weapons, they're going to cut off access to safe houses, they're going to cut off access to intelligence, blah, 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 you name it. And so the administration's initial statement after the horrific attack on October 7th of last year, that we don't have any indications of Iran's involvement, is a bald-faced lie. And I will tell that to your face, Joe Biden, and your chief of intelligence, and also your head of DOD. The reason why, ask any Green Beret or any special forces person who has worked with the military, training it and helping it, in many different ways, equipping it for 15 years, and you tell me you don't know they're planning something of this size? Yeah. It doesn't pass the smell test.
Doesn't pass.
And then the coordination between suddenly the PLO and suddenly between and Hezbollah, which, by the way, has pretty much kept quiet, is not a coincidence. Just leave it at that. So it all goes back to Tehran, and as I do in a presentation that will soon be on my YouTube channel, Iran is the terrorist go-to sponsor.
Frightening situation. Let's talk about that when we come back from word from all of our partnerships. This is Jim Blythe and Mark Liebman, and I've got to put out a little thing right quick. I work for Fairway Independent Mortgage. They help me with this program, and they sponsor this program. And my NMLS number is 311548. Theirs is 2289. And we're based in Dallas. Our branch is based out in Garland. So I got to tell you, we're an equal opportunity lender. I'm a reverse mortgage specialist. We're here for you. We're here to help you with your home buying needs, with your home financing needs, and I'm here to help you with senior counseling. I'm a certified senior advisor. This is Jim Blythe, and for Joe in Jacksonville, welcome aboard this morning, Joe. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Well, hey, good morning and good day. This is Jim Blythe. A special thank you to the DBTV network that puts us on Amazon Fire and Roku. And I got to tell you, I am so thankful for AUN out in California, probably the last bastion of conservatism in California. And I got to tell you, Mark, having you on board is always a huge education for me. I try and do as much research as I can. So when I come in here, I don't feel like an idiot. But I got to tell you, let's go on now and talk about all of this that is playing out in the Middle East. There's also a big conflict going on in the Ukraine.
Yes.
How does this dovetail with what's going on in the Middle East?
Okay, so I'm going to start with a quote from the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who is the first leader of the Islamic Republic, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, and so this is a learned man, a learned Islamic scholar who is now the head or the president or the supreme leader, I think is what his title was, of Iran. And this is what he said in 1980, in the early 1980s. He says, Islam says, kill all the unbelievers just as they would kill you all. Islam says, kill them, the non-Muslims, put them to the sword and scatter their armies, kill in the service of Allah those who may want to kill you. Now, I actually went back and I pulled a bunch of quotes from the Quran, and they are all the same thing. Kill the unbelievers, kill the infidels, destroy them, burn them, whatever. So the question is, and we're starting to see indications of this, is there has been since probably the past 20 years a relationship between Iran and Russia. Putin has supplied weapons, but not the best that Russia has, although they did give them several batteries of S-400s. Now they're in exchange for missiles, they're giving them, or drones and missiles, they're giving them S-35s, Su-35s, which is a pretty advanced kind of an F-15E type airplane. And they are, and so there's that going on back and forth. Oh, and also, by the way, they provide some, but not all, of the technology for the Iranian nuclear program, but the Russians were smart enough not to give them enough to make a weapon, a deliverable weapon, I should say. So where has that gone now? Well, last spring there was a meeting with Putin in Iran with senior Iranian leadership, primarily of the IRGC, but also the foreign ministers and their Ministry of Defense. And that's when the exchange of, or the agreement to sell Su-35s came about. There are now indications that there were, quote, other topics, unquote. So Russia is involved in a life and death struggle with Ukraine. If Ukraine loses, Putin has got a real big problem on his hands. The indications are, if you look at what really is happening and not listen to the U.S. media, which has done a poor job in covering this war, is the Ukrainians still have the tactical and strategic initiative. They have made great progress, and they've destroyed about, depending on who you talk to, I use RUSI, which is the Royal Uniformed Services Institute, which is kind of like the keeper of numbers, and it's also the Brits' think tank on these kinds of issues. They say somewhere around 40 to 50% of the Russian army's military capability has been destroyed in the past 2 years.
Wow.
Oh, wait a second. It gets more exciting. They've lost about 150,000 dead. They're pushing 300,000+ wounded, of which about half of those, when I say are incapacitated, blinded, deaf, lost limbs.
They'll never go back to war.
Yeah, they're military age males that are no longer qualified. It keeps getting worse, and he's losing people somewhere at the rate of about 7,000 a week. So in Western terms, that's an unacceptable casualty rate. So Putin is struggling with trying to defeat Ukraine, and he's doubled down on the propaganda war. And every so often he plays the nuclear card, and the Western media goes nuts. Oh my God, he's going to use nuclear weapons. No, he's not. But he's doing that just to create hate and discontent in the West, because the West picks it up, the Western media. So in this conference, what some pundits are beginning to leak out is there was a conversation, essentially, how Iran can you help me being Putin. And Iran controls Hezbollah and Hamas. And the fact of the matter is that the U.S. had large stocks of weapons in Israel for use in any future conflict in the Middle East. They have stocks elsewhere. We won't go into where they are, but you can probably guess. And although I don't know for sure because it's been decades since I've had a clearance. And so start something with Israel. And I don't believe Hamas did what it did without the encouragement of Iran, because Iran realized that if they didn't think this, then they're really dumb. That the Israelis would react the way they did. So give you an idea, Israel's a small country. You kill 1,500 people in Israel, that's like you've killed 100,000 Americans in one attack. It's pretty ugly. and they're pissed, they being the Israelis, and they are not going to stop until they wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. Now, they're doing it primarily in Gaza, but they are also reaching out in other parts of the world because most of Hamas's leadership is not in Gaza. Some of it's in Qatar, some of it's in London. And strangely enough, a couple of those guys have been whacked.
Yeah.
And the Israelis are going to go get them.
Well, here's one of the other things that I've read. The tremendous amounts of money to go to the Palestinians to be able to help them has been diverted to those three guys you're talking about. Those three guys don't live in Palestine. And that's the same thing. I mean, it's like they're stealing all this money and fomenting all this hate and discontent. So let me go back real quick in summary. Russia asked Iran to ask Hamas and Hezbollah to find a way to get the attention drawn to Israel where they could have a chance to supposedly have more assets in basically Ukraine. And if Ukraine wins, they won't just kill Putin. It's going to be a lot worse than that.
Well, I don't think the Ukrainians will go into Mother Russia per se. They just want their land back. But it will cause...
All right, we got to take a break. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Well, hey, this is Jim Blythe with Mark Liebman, U.S. Navy captain, best
selling
author. Thank you. My brain just skipped a beat because we've been talking about things that are really important. Why are they so important to you in the United States? Because they are affecting world trade. They are affecting world markets. They are affecting all of us. And we've just deployed 3 carriers to the Pacific. There are 2 carriers in the Med right now involved in, or just one?
Ford
came home?
Ford came home. Eisenhower's the only one that's there right now.
So we are involved up to our eyebrows.
Amen.
And we should be, because if we don't, then what you're going to see is a repeat of World War II. I'm sorry, I'm saying that, but I'm telling you, Ukraine falls, you're going to see other countries fall, because Putin's deal is to reunite the Soviet Union under a military dictatorship.
Stalin-like dictatorship.
Yeah,
yep.
And let me tell you, under Stalin, over 20 million Russians were killed, not to mention everybody else.
I hate to say that. That's just during World War II.
Yeah.
The total number is about 30.
Oh. All right, let's go back to, we were talking about this sort of chain that started with Russia, talking to Iran, talking to Hamas, talking to Hezbollah, and providing the resources that has started this Israeli deal.
Yeah. So
where do we go from here?
Well, so here's what's really interesting is I don't know how far Iran is going to push this, because again, if you look at Putin's primary goal and Tehran's, the mullah's primary goal, it's to remain in power. Okay, so they're not going to do it. I would think, as a rational human being, and then again, I'm dealing with a religious fanatic, so I'm not rational, and my rational view and their rational view is going to be different. But how far are they going to push this? And so that's why I came back to the thing I said early on. You got to create pain in Tehran before they're going to stop, because anything that threatens the regime is going to cause them pain and is going to cause them to rethink their actions. So this is why I was dumbfounded when 2 U.S. presidents, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, when there was demonstrated unrest against the regime in Iran, they were silent. They didn't use the bully pulpit and to encourage them and just, again, to create pain for this regime, which is pretty unpopular, but and maintains its position with a secret police that makes the Savka, which was on the Shah's rule, look like choir boys. So again, I come back to the original thing. So Putin's in a fight, in a bloody battle that he's not doing well in. We can argue whether he's winning or losing or what is, and I'm of the opinion that the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be for him. The problem we have in the United States is we have not had a leader stand up and say, this is why it's important, sell it to the American public, and then energize the defense industry base. Because once we do that, 70% of the money that we spend goes to U.S. citizens in terms of jobs, in terms of businesses being profitable, buying stuff. It rebuilds capabilities that we don't have, that we've been buying stuff from elsewhere, and it's good for the United States' economy. Now, wars are horrific. I've been in 3 of them. I don't like them. But the fact of the matter is, we are spending today, and this is a number that was mind-blowing to me, the amount of support we're giving to Ukraine is 4% or less than 4% of 1 year's DoD spend. So it's minuscule.
We're not really fighting to help. We're not really trying to help them.
And not one U.S. soldier, one NATO soldier has died. Now, there have been Americans and citizens from NATO countries that have gone to fight in Ukraine, and some of them have been killed. God bless them, because I think, I admire what they're going to do. I'm an old fart. I'm 78 years old. And
Hey, I'm only 77. Does that mean I'm a young one?
No, but but anyway, my point is I'm well past my prime, and so I support those guys. But the fact of the matter is, nobody in NATO has died, and the president of the United States is the only president in NATO, or NATO country leader, because we have prime ministers and other ones, that has not said this is what has to happen. Ukraine needs to win. It needs to get its territory back, and we will support that. And we will be to use the words of FDR, the arsenal of democracy that makes that happen. And the Europeans have already started down that road. They're all behind us, because if you've ever flown in Europe, it doesn't take very long to get from Berlin to Moscow. Yeah. It doesn't take very long to get from London to Kyiv, or Kiev. So the fact of the matter is, they're a lot closer to this, and they're about a third of the NATO countries used to live under the thumb of the Russian bear, and they want no part of doing that again. And they're the ones that feel threatened the most: Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Hungary, even Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Let's put a 30,000-foot view on this real quick. If I'm a dictator, if I'm this kind of person, I'm in power, I've got all the wealth. They say Putin is worth hundreds of billions of dollars now.
Yeah, 400 billion.
And he's got this group of people around him. I understand there's 5 of them who are all multi-billionaires. And if he loses power in their culture, he doesn't just get unelected and gets to go spend his time in a Dachau. In their culture, when you fall out of power, you lose everything.
You get dead.
You get dead, and all of the resources go. So he's got some people who have a vested interest in keeping him propped up. But the reality of it is, he is trying to bring back the old Stalinist-type regime, which is deadly. And if they are successful, it will bring war to us as well, in our front yard and in our face, because they have to have an enemy. They have to have a reason to have a big military. They have to be on the attack, or their own people will attack them.
Yeah, so NATO was the bugbear during the Cold War. That was the nasty enemy of the Soviet Union, and it's the nasty enemy of Putin. And so the question is why? Well, it's the simple reason is all you have to do is look across the border and look at the economies and the standard of living in the NATO countries, and look at the standard of living in Russia today.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a clear alternative that Putin can't deal with. And the fact of the matter is, if Ukraine becomes independent and becomes a member of NATO, then it's more territory, or it's another place that borders Russia that now has this alternative that is better than what he's offering, and that's part of the problem. And so Putin wants to bring back the glory of the Soviet Union as a global power. Whether he can do that or not, it remains to be seen. But taking Ukraine is step one, and then the other part of this is, if he succeeds, there's a bunch of other tin pot dictators, the guy sitting in Pyongyang, the guys in Tehran, and then also Xi Jinping, who is now leading probably the second global power in the world, and he will be emboldened, and he's got his eyes um, on Taiwan, and that's a whole nother conversation we can have some other time. I personally don't think that he's going to go after Taiwan because his economy's in shambles. There's been recent releases about corruption in the military. Their missiles don't seem to work as advertised, et cetera, et cetera. Couldn't happen to a nicer group of people, but the fact of the matter is, I don't think he's quite ready, and his time is running out on Xi Jinping for a lot of reasons.
Well, and one of the big things, you mentioned it, there was an article that I read, is that China is facing economic bankruptcy right now. They're in real bad shape. We don't understand that. We don't understand the global economics and global policies and what direct impact we have on us. We also don't understand what this administration has failed to do and what have they done that have hurt us. Well, we've just talked about what they failed to do, but also what they did do is basically in a push to get rid of fossil fuels instead of a decent program of transition. They took this freight train and tried to turn it 180 degrees doing 1,000 miles an hour. That doesn't work. You can't even do it in a jet. And so what's happened is everything we have has been terribly impacted by inflation. I am very sensitive to that, not only because of my age, but my work as a certified senior advisor. I'm dealing with people, 95% of the people in retirement in the United States only have Social Security. And the average Social Security is $1,450 a month. You make gasoline more expensive. You made food more expensive. You made all of these things more expensive, and you're destroying the baby boomer generation.
Yes.
And that is part of this whole thing that I think is being a destruction of Western philosophy and Western values.
Okay, so if you look at the way revolutionaries think, and I will use the Marxist as an example, but most revolutionaries think this way: is they have to destroy the current organization and culture so they can rebuild it in their own eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I hate to say that, but in 1775, we did that. Okay. Now, what we created, it was far better than what we had. And in some cases, many revolutions, the end result is better than what was. And I can give you an example: is the unification of Italy, the unification of Germany. Yes, I know the Germans started 2 world wars, but or involved in 2 world wars. We can argue as whether they started World War I or not. But the point of the matter is, there have been many revolutions that have led to the end product was better than what began. But in most cases, and particularly what you're doing, what's happening in the United States is, if you remember, Obama said, "I'm going to reshape American society." Biden has taken many of that to the extreme, and some of the policies that are coming out of his government, his administration, such as restrictions on certain kinds of appliances, this forcing of electronic vehicles,
which is not sustainable.
It's not sustainable, and it's also uneconomic because for a variety of reasons. And they haven't dealt with, and nobody's talking about, how are we going to dispose of all these batteries in all the electric cars, which have rare earth metals that have been monkeyed with and create disposal problems that are different, but are complicated, just like you have to deal with nuclear waste. So all these things, we haven't solved this technology, and we're going running, as you said, we've tried to turn this chain. So I'm a retiree. I'm fortunate in the fact that I have more coming in than the average beast. But what is also happening is we're seeing a divergent in and a breakup of the strength of the U.S. economy, which is the middle class. So more and more people are being pushed down to lower economic strata. And then the people who've got money, they're saying, well, I've got mine, screw you.
Yeah, and here's the problem. a lot of people didn't vote last time that should have voted because they weren't happy with the candidates. And we've now got an administration that I think is failing. And
Has failed.
it has failed and is determined to change this country because they said it. They said it, but that's not for the better. They don't want it for the better. They want it for their own profit. When a politician becomes a billionaire without producing a thing other than selling influence, that's not good.
Yep.
And that's what's been happening. So I'm sorry, that's my soapbox for today. I think one of the most interesting things about all of this conversation, though, you said China, you don't think China will go into Taiwan. One of the things I didn't know, China and Israel had a lot of trade going on a long time or some time ago.
They still, I don't know if they still do, but yeah, for years, with the U.S.'s blessing, the Israeli defense industry helped the Chinese in some areas. There was a time where the Chinese were buying Israeli sensors to put on radars or licenses to play with, which caused a fair amount of angst amongst a lot of people that I know. As it turns out, it wasn't, what's the right word? It wasn't, they didn't get deployed in large quantities, at least as far as I know. But the fact of the matter is that Israel and China have had a healthy trade relationship for decades. I don't know where it is today, but I have to believe
Probably has some.
Probably has some.
Here's one of the other things. When we were in Israel a number of years ago in 2017, one of the people I was talking to said, man, although Jordanians are Muslim, they really, really have gotten close relationships with Israel, and they keep it quiet because of Muslims, like you talked about. But there's a lot of trade. There's a lot of things going on between Jordan and Israel that are very positive. And here's one of the things I look at. Hey, Iran, take a look at what you could be being a benefactor of. And yet their leadership goes, we got to kill the infidel. We got to kill the infidel. That doesn't work.
Yeah, so during the Iran-Iraq war, the technicians that kept the U.S. equipment, aircraft, F-4s and F-14s flying were all were Israelis and some U.S. citizens. That was, if you remember the Iran-Contra scandal,
yeah, that
was part of that. So Iran, if you look at this from a geopolitical aspect, Iran wants to recreate the Persian Empire. I don't want to go as far as saying they want to recreate the caliphate. That's ISIS. But I think that maybe those goals are starting to
Mark,
converging.
I've got a lot of Iranian Persian friends here in the United States. And many of them go, oh, it's so terrible. I've got family over there. They're living under an oppressive deal. They can't get food in some cases. They can't get this, can't get that. They're not happy. The rank and file people are not happy with Iran's leadership, but they don't have the guns. They can't take over. They can't fight against this. The ballot box there doesn't carry half as much as a .38 caliber bullet. So I got to tell you, we got problems, and we're talking about it. Maybe we'll hit on a couple of solutions when we come back. This is Jim Blythe, and I'm here with Mark Liebman. We're talking about current events and how they affect you. How do they affect you? We got 3 carriers on the way to the Pacific right now. We are deployed around the world. We are trying to keep the peace, and you need to take a look at all that's going on because it affects you. This is Jim Blythe and Mark Liebman. We'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. Thank you for being on board. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Well, Mark, we've had a pretty interesting program when you start talking about current events and what's going on and really taking a look at it. Our news media, I think, is woefully inadequate in terms of really trying to explain it. Don't you?
Yes. So I spent many hours a week listening to programs from European-based media companies, and I think they've done a much better job covering the war in the Ukraine and actually what's going on in Israel. Because what you see in the U.S. is all about pathos, about, oh, we got the hostages, oh, people are dying. Yes, they are. But let's get to the bottom line as to why this all happened and get the American people to understand why it happened and what's going to happen what may happen going forward. So part of the problem, I believe, is that the U.S. media does not do its homework, and then the other part of it, and by that I mean go deep, take a deep dive, because everything is a 30-second or 60-second soundbite. Whereas several of these European networks, and I'm going to use Frontline on Times Radio as an example, they have 2 or 3 commentators that do 30 and 40-minute in-depth interviews with knowledgeable people about topics, and they take the time to do their homework. They're prepared with good questions. They get the guy speaking, and they don't take BS answers. So they don't accept talking points. And so what happens is you watch this thing, and typically they're 25 to 30 minutes, and you suddenly go, that was really interesting, and it was educational. Whereas all you get is platitudes coming out of the president. Well, yeah, we support the Ukrainians, or in this case, we don't want to do this. And it's terrible. And when you see the quote on interviews on 60 Minutes, and I'm picking on them, on whatever the U.S. 2020, again, they're heavily edited, number one, and number two, they don't ask hard questions, and worse, they ask dumb questions. And
okay, let me stop you. What you're really talking about is not news media, but propaganda media.
I didn't want to say that.
Well, can I say it?
You're the host.
Okay. I think that's part of what the problem is. They're wanting an ideology out there that they're fomenting, and that's not necessarily good. And so wake up. Demand your news media do a good job. Demand this and go and look and find. I went online and I found a lot of things. Let me mention something else, and we've talked about all this in the administration. I saw something because we are veterans. I'm a veteran. I'm signed up under the PACT Act. I'm signed up for VA health care. Something hit my box this week that really upset me. There is a bill from the U.S. Senate and there's a bill from the U.S. House to stop the VA health care system from funding illegal immigrants' health care. Now, the Democrats have denied it, but it's actually been happening.
Yes.
And it's a terrible tragedy, especially since we're in a situation right now with probably government cutbacks and spending. The VA healthcare system is needed now more than ever before. And let me tell you why. So many of our Vietnam veterans are entering retirement and only have their retirement. And basically, they need the VA healthcare system. And if the VA healthcare system is being drained of money, and it can't support community care, and it can't support these things, and it can't keep people on the job, we veterans are going to get hurt. I don't think it's fair to the American public or to the American veterans to have this sort of thing going on. And it's just an overall, I know this sounds like I am not a Republican or a Democrat. I've always voted a split ticket, but now I'm upset because of what's going on.
Yeah, I'm horrified actually, because this is a violation of the VA's charter. The VA's charter is to help veterans. And if you look at what it was originally done, it was originally set up to help veterans who are injured in the line of duty and who needed long-term sustained care. That was the original purpose of the VA, okay? It has expanded well beyond that, but right now it's just a large bloated bureaucracy. There have been attempts to reform it under several administrations in my lifetime, and it has failed. I don't want to get into discussions about the quality of health care provided by the VA, but taking funds allocated for one government program and putting it in another government program requires an act of Congress to approve it, because that's one of the reasons that they have oversight on how money is spent. So the fact that the Biden administration is even suggesting or thinking about this actually is insulting to me as a veteran.
Well, let me tell you something. If you don't believe me, I did a bunch of research to look it up. And yes, the Democrats are denying this, but by the same token, there's too much evidence there that is actually happening. And I believe it's affecting VA healthcare. I also believe it's causing them to try and retrench on some of the programs. I think there's a lot of things going on which are very detrimental to us. So I absolutely support these two bills. Go take a look. Senator Daines has done one, and I can't remember who's done the other one. Bosch, I believe. Bosch, what's his name?
Yeah.
We were digging.
Until you brought this up, I had heard about this. I didn't know there was.
There's one in the House and one in the Senate.
Yeah, it's just
so. I got to tell you, look it up. If you don't believe me, look it up. And if you don't like it, then write a letter to your congressman, write a letter to your senator, and say, I'm a veteran and I'm sick of this. So we always close with a prayer. This has been a tough program today because we've really laid it on the line. So I'd like to say a prayer. Dear God in heaven, thank you for putting protection and for watching over our active duty military, our soldiers, sailors, and airmen around the world, and for our first responders here who run into the fire instead of away from it. Dear God, thank you for our veterans, and thank you for standing up for our veterans, and thank you for our veterans standing up to keep America beautiful and to keep America free. Keep America one nation, under God, united with liberty and justice for all. Amen. In your name we pray. Mark, this has been a great program. Share this, please, on YouTube, on Facebook. Share this with your friends. Say, wow, go look up the things that we talked about. You can find them on the internet in a heartbeat. This is important for you to know. This is an election year. Be a part. This is Veterans Impact.